Here, folks. Welcome to another edition of Throwing Down Some Heavy Light. My name is Marlene Byndon. I'm the chair of a group called Movement I'm All for Race Equity, and our mission deals with racial justice issues as well as trying to deal with some of the disparities in our respective communities. Today, we have with us Marlene Byndon, who lives in Prosper, Texas, where her grandfather, Arthur Wade, was born. Marlene was born in Kansas City, where I initially contacted her. I have never met her in person, but over 30 years ago, or maybe 35 years ago, when I was in Kansas City, I looked up on the phone book and noticed the names of those with the last name Byndon, and I called her and I talked to, I think, her and her husband, maybe her daughter. We had such a pleasant chat back then with her and her family, and also we got a chance to kind of know each other. I remember we also exchanged pictures at one point, but I lost contact with her over the years. And again, but through Facebook, I was able to track her down. We were able to run across each other, and we continue some of our conversations that we initially had. Marlene has been involved in tracing her ancestors' roots for many years. We invited her to talk about the significant aspect of her ancestral roots and so on. And we also want her to talk about how do you contact some of those families or those who are trying to learn more about their background? How do you help people to do some of that activity? Henry Gates made it a national event when he had his program called Finding Your Roots. And of course, it became a sensational PBS. I think it started in March of 2012 and it ended some years later, related to one of the guests who had some ancestries dealing with enslavement. We're also trying to get people to help them understand why it is so important to do ancestor and genealogy and so on. And so we invited Marlene to come and share some of her observations and issues. So Marlene, can you please welcome and of course to share with a little bit more about yourself and how you got involved in this?
Well, I believe I have a pretty interesting story. My mom died at the age of 18, and I was 18 months old, and my sister was 8 weeks. And my dad was also 18 years old. So here we are, two little babies living in Kansas City. Nobody really wanted to take on two babies.
Mm-hmm.
But my father's father said, go get them girls.
Mm-hmm.
So he adopted us into the family. He said, come, come, you belong to me. You're my blood.
Mm-hmm.
He came and he got us and he took care of us. And then when we got to a certain age where he thought we was too big and didn't appreciate him whooping our butts, he gave us to one of his daughters. I went to live with one of his daughters.
Mm-hmm.
But in this journey, I always felt different. When you went to a Mother's Day, I looked around and I didn't have the mother. And the father walked away. So I didn't meet him until I was 16 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And I was always made to feel like I was an extra. I was someone's burden. And nobody sat down and really talked to me about the other people in my family on both sides of my family. Who did I belong to on my mother's side? Who were those people? Who were my father's people besides the one I knew? So that was my stimulus to say, I want to know more. I want to know more. I may be dating someone in my gene pool. And I tell my kids that now. I said, so it's important to know your stories. So that was my stimulus for getting started, is because I wanted to know more from whence I came.
Mm-hmm. Now, people can purchase programs on the internet, and I've seen that, such as those examining ancestries and genetic links and so on. How does this differ from extensive research involving many pages of records? For example, I have a white neighbor across the street who has a notebook full of his genetic background and families in Ireland and so on. So how do these different aspects differ? Are they the same or what?
Well, here's my response to that. I believe, and this is what has worked for me, you have to do both. You cannot just rely on the internet to get your information. And of course, it's extensive. There's things there that will certainly help you. But for me, I also had to touch and feel records. I actually went back to where my father went to school and where my grandfather had raised Cotton and his kids. I touched those records and I was able to dig a little bit deeper into my roots. So I believe you've got to couple both of those things together.
Now, some as someone some consider African Americans events back to the enslavement of centuries ago and so on. Again, African Americans experienced many things in this country and so on. Uh, my question somewhat is why it's so difficult for us because of enslavement and so on to deal with tracing our roots? What are some of your observations in that area?
Well, that's an excellent question. I didn't realize the difficulty until I went to the African American Museum in Atlanta. Let me share a little bit about that. When you go to that museum, the first thing they do is they take you down and you hear this wailing and moaning. And it's the slaves that's being brought over on the ships by the white people to take care of the land. They were treated like cattle. Oftentimes the manifest started out with 1,000 slaves, but by the time they got to the Americas, there may have been 400 or 500 because they had chained them together. They let them die, and all they were looking for is what product was left over. You have that beginning, and you're dropped off. You're dropped off into the Americas. You don't, and the person you're giving to looks at you as a labor resource, not a person. And so when you look at the slave records, what you see is black male, 6, no name. They made sure we didn't speak our language. Whatever village you came from in Africa, those words were not to be spoken. They made sure we didn't learn to read nor write because our main goal was to create economy and revenue for the United States of America. Did I
Wow.
answer that question?
Well, you definitely did. Now, as a former Black Studies adjunct professor in Vassar, there was an insignificant mention in about many of the individual families' background. And many years ago, many of the students in our public school system had some of these challenges. For example, my niece was told that she was not an she was that a black young black girl said she was not an African and so on. And my niece was saying, technically, you are in terms of your background. And this was in front of a white teacher. And what was unfortunate about the white teacher, and then remember the school Lewis and Clark, did not correct that student who didn't know any better, the African American student, that she had links to the continent because obviously we've been brainwashed, we have not been told our history. And my question is, from your perspective, why do black folks not explore the past because of this historical trauma? In other words, some of us will say we're from Europe or we're from some other places, but obviously when you look at our history, you know the culture is different. What are your thoughts on this paradigm or this issue?
That one is difficult for me, and I can just speak from only from my perspective. I want to say one thing first. We're not all Africans. Just because we are black, we could be from Jamaica. We could be from different parts of the world where there are dark-skinned people that they picked up and brought to the Americas. But think about the fact that we weren't even proud of our blackness.
Hmm.
We weren't even proud of our blackness until someone told us it was okay. Can I tell a personal story
Oh,
here?
sure.
I come from a family where I was the darkest person in the sibling group. And I was given names like Shine, Blackie. And of course, my sister was light skinned and mostly everybody else was. So the trauma of my color followed me. I never thought that I was beautiful because the person that got all of the accolades was a light skinned black person. The president of the class was a light skinned black person. We, somewhere along the way, had to learn to love our blackness. And just think about back in slavery time who was in the house with the white folks? They had the light skinned brothers and sisters in there because they looked more like them. We were in the fields doing the work.
Hmm.
So we've been traumatized. We've been traumatized, and sometimes we don't feel comfortable saying, look at me, I'm black. And white people are sometimes traumatized by the fact that you are black. I
Wow.
can say I can say that with very specificity. I can. I want to tell you a personal story. I was one of the first Black women to be hired at Southwestern Bell back in the late 60s because of the Civil Rights Act. And I would go to work and there would be ladies that needed to leave and I would want to take their spot. They were either going to break or something. And I would have to go and plug in and take their spot because I was a long distance operator and that's what I was supposed to do. And then I noticed that if I sat next to certain people, certain white people, they moved. And I was like, it must be because I'm Black. But guess what I learned, Jamal? Every time I came to work, I made sure I sat by them because I love seeing them move because I wasn't going anywhere. So not only they do it to us, we do it to ourselves.
Mm.
Just the story I told about me. I was set apart. I was different because I was dark skinned. So there's always been trauma within and outside our race.
Gotcha. Now, the other came is if someone wanted to learn about how to do genealogy or so on, what are the steps can they do to catch up and embark on this search that you've been in for so many years?
Well, I want to tell you how I started first. I believe I said that I was born in Kansas City and I left there as a child. Came to Oklahoma and that's where I was raised. But I always knew my grandfather was from Texas. And in my job, I was able to finally move to Texas. And that's what inspired me to say, I want to touch the records, go out and see for myself where my people actually walked. And so I've been blessed to be able to do research, not just on ancestry, but to actually go, and I think I mentioned this before, to see the records, to see where my people actually planted cotton and picked cotton. So I look and try to embrace both types. I really, at this point, rely extensively on ancestry. It can be a little expensive, but they have excellent records if you want to start there as a place to build your family tree.
I mean, when you just said it's expensive, give me some price ranges. What do you pay for these different kind of sets
Um,
when you're doing this?
I think if I think it runs me about $60 a month. That may not be expensive to some people, but that's nearly 700 or 800 a year. And in addition to just the ancestry, they also you can get some extra things where you can get newspapers. That I'm putting that number in there too. And the newspapers from way back in the day that may have stories about your ancestors. In fact, I was helping one gentleman and he found out that two of his cousins, one of them broke into a school and stole meat and went to
Hmm.
jail. That was in the newspaper. Another one committed armed robbery. The story was there. So there's lots of resources. My favorite one is Ancestry. There's My Heritage, there's 23andMe, but I find that Ancestry probably has the best records, the most organized records, and it has an ease for you to move through the records and create your tree and understand the stories.
Hmm. Now, by the way, you and I discovered each other through the last names, and at one point you said to me there are different ways that people have spelled Byndon.
Right.
I've seen that. So help me with the different ways, because again, you said something to me one day about that, and I've seen people pronounce it the same way we do, but again, I've seen them pronounce it differently, but I've seen it spelled differently. So give me a little bit variations of what we're talking about when you use Byndon.
Well, I have to give you some background.
Mm-hmm.
In my research on ancestry, I found that the Bidens came from South Carolina. There was two brothers,
Mm.
and they brought their slaves into Arkansas. And one of them chose to spell their name Binam, and the other one chose to spell their name Byndom. And so along the way, the name kind of changed and grew. I have a brother-in-law. Midwife came out to the house to to help him come into the world. And of course, she's the one that take the records and report them. She spelled his name Byndom.
Mm.
And so when he went into the military, that was his name. And so he kept it. So he's the only Byndom that spells. So a lot of it was driven by the census. Who came out to take the census? And of course, we couldn't read nor write. So they phonetically spelled our name in a lot of instances. So that's why you see some of the differences.
Got you.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
I was surprised some years ago when a white student in one of my classes told me he cannot trace his background. Again, I thought all white folks with their names and ancestries, they could just look at their names and go back to a normal family tree. And he basically said he was adopted. And then others shared in certain parts of this country, and particularly in the Appalachian area, some of them can trace their background because of broken roots or poverty and so on. Explain this concept to me in terms of adoption, triangle, how do you do that, especially with closed adoption, and then this issue of not being able to do that. So if you can't do it, what happens if you can't try some of the information? Have you seen people who cannot do that?
There is going to be some instances where you won't be able to. I'm going to start with us first. Back in the day when we were just off the slave plantation, maybe first generation away from being slaves, when someone had a child and they didn't want it, they just give it to the lady down the street. She needed somebody to help her around the house. They give her a kid. And just think, you're black, nobody cares. Nobody's tracing that, right? So that's one thing. And then adoption records get where they're private. And you've got to spend money, you got to go down to the courthouse, and you got to do all kind of research to see if you can connect the dots. So those things, just like it's hard for us to trace our roots because of slavery, adoption, broken families, those things can be difficult too,
Mhm,
especially if you don't have someone that can tell you the story, right?
mhm,
You
mhm,
don't have a relative or anyone. You have just got to go down, use vital statistics, any records that you can find. But the good news now is DNA.
mhm.
DNA, you submit your DNA to and on Ancestry, they will tell you who some of your third cousins are
Oh,
and your
wow.
second cousins with names. So we've come a long ways in fixing that problem just because of the DNA enlightenment. In fact, I got a note today from Ancestry that says, I found another trait. I found another something for you to consider. I have connected with second and third and fourth cousins because of my DNA. So that's another tool that we have that can fix some of the brokenness that you're talking about.
Yeah, I
And
just
if you
read
watch any of the programs on TV, like Lost Family, they use that
the
extensively.
DNA. And this
Mm-hmm.
particular person I know in Omaha told me that he had a daughter 15 years ago and didn't even know she exists, except he did the ancestry thing and DNA and found out she was living in Atlanta, Georgia, and he was surprised. And I think he reunited with her, but it was something that happened a long time ago. And like I said, by doing this link, he found he had this offspring. He was somewhat obviously surprised and shocked by it, but he was able to do that by using that. So I think some people need to talk about doing that to at least to make sure, as you said earlier, you don't marry your relative or you do the inbreeding that some people do inadvertently. So it's very important. I was going to ask you, are you familiar with other racial groups who search your background, such as Native Americans or Latinos? Have you run across some of them?
Yes, in fact, I have what I call an adopted daughter. She I met her in Kansas City. Her mother was a full-blooded Indian, and her mother died, and she was looking for a mother. And I said, and she was doing my hair, and I said, I can be your mom. I can be your mom. And because her mom had died at an early age, like 40, like early 40s, and she didn't sit down and tell her the stories. She wanted to know. So I did her research. But the good thing about Indians is that they put them on the reservation.
Mm.
And because they were on the reservations, the white folks kept good records.
Oh, wow.
They would go to the reservation, go to every household and make a list of who was in there. They got it going on. It's so much easier for them
On the
because they
reservation.
needed to track that. Yes. Yes. So Indians, yes. a lot easier than it is for Black people because of the Indian rolls were kept, where there were no rolls kept with us other than slave records that didn't have names.
Wow.
And then I have a nephew-in-law, and he's Hispanic. And he kept saying, I come from Kings. I know I do. You smoke too much pot to come from Kings. Okay, you didn't hear that.
Hmm.
And he was raised in a neighborhood that was totally Hispanic. I knew his background, but I was able to go out and research him, and he was connected to Spanish royalty.
Hmm.
So, but again, it's so much easier for other cultures other than the Black people who came on the ships with with nothing, with no records other than what the white man chose to keep.
Hmm.
And I
Well,
just have to say this too. Well, I'll say that at the end. But
yeah.
yes, but sometimes it is, I would say in my research, it has been easier for me to track them back, Hispanics, the Indians, uh, whites, than it is for me to track African Americans.
Oh, one question I didn't ask you just came to mind. How many hours do you normally spend when you do your research? In other words, I don't know how much time is involved, but give me some ballpark of time when you're working on some of these different projects.
Well, first off, I have to tell you it's a passion.
Okay.
There are times when you get so caught up and you get on the trail that you don't even think about the time. You forget to go eat, and just like I had to do before we started this, just take time to go to the bathroom. Yeah, and then come back. Probably if I had to, I'm extremely busy doing other things, and I feel so despondent because I haven't been able to focus on doing my ancestry genealogy work. But I would say maybe 10, 12 hours a week.
Okay.
Not a whole lot. I get more enjoyment out of doing verbal research, calling people and striking up that conversation and doing it, writing it down, or even recording them so that once they are gone, the family will have something, a voice and a story to remember them by. Yes. So, and I may be being a little off on the hours, but I would think at least if I had to look at my week, I would spend 10 to 12 hours on an average doing research.
Mhm. You know, it's fascinating about that. I know when I was at Metro, and there's some other classes where some of the professors or adjuncts would have students go and interview their grandparents, and some of the things when they come back, they would say tell stories they never knew, because too often we have these historians who are within our own family linkage area, within our genetic pool that we don't even talk to, and then after they pass away or go to the spirit world, we say we wish we would have asked them this and that, and so I've talked to many people who regret that they didn't sit down and record the grandparents, and there's few of us who have been around our great grandparents, but it's just fascinating
Mhm.
to get the history, oral history from someone within your direct family line or genetic line about what happened in your family. And some of us don't have never even seen our grandparents. So again, it's a
Mhm.
challenge, but I do think one of the things I enjoyed about reading and hearing about these stories the students did is they were in awe or astonished at some of the stuff that went on in their own family tree. And so I think that's a great
Mhm.
assignment for some of these historians or teachers to help as we explore our roots. We're getting down to about the last question before we open it up. And I want to ask you, if you have to know if I like to know the cost of your work, how much fun do an individual spend on this endeavor? So, example, if someone's starting out, what kind of funds would they need to spend? And again, you alluded to the time, but Marlene, what kind of money are we talking in terms of going to be a really long-term person to do this kind of work? You alluded to a one number of 60 or something a month, and then over 300. But can you spend more than that?
Of course you can. If you if you're wanting to travel to go to spots to get real pictures, then of course that's added expense. If you want to use more than one tool, I use Ancestry. If you want to use Heritage, 23andMe, if you want to dive into newspapers, then all of that costs money. None of it is cheap. If I had to tell you, probably you will be making an investment of I would say at least $800 to $900
You get heavy duty
every.
into it.
I think most closer to 1,000. I
Wow.
have a close, and that's a year. Let's
Okay.
say in a year. I'm not going to give you all of those because this is what I'm going to suggest at the end is that you do verbal research first. See if there's someone still in your family that can tell you the stories. That helps you get started. Yeah. And
Mhm.
then you can record that and keep those as your records. But if I had to look out, I would think I spent about $1,200 a year just on doing research.
Wow.
Mhm.
Wow.
Yeah.
We got a few minutes before we open it up, but I just want to ask you, do you have any closing or comments you want to make before we open it up to other participants who may want to raise a question or two with you?
I'm going to ask that you do this. If there's an elderly person in your family that may know the story, sit down with them. Normally, they like talking about what they did, what happened. I can remember my grandfather, I thought those were old fogey stories. I didn't want to hear that old timey stuff. And then as I started doing my research, I wished that he was here to share it because I didn't always know if I was getting the right data. And then he left a daughter. She just died here 2 years ago. She was 91, and she had all the stories, and I was able to record her, and she helped me on my journey of finding my roots. So the thing is, if this is your passion, if this is your joy, use all the resources you can to go down to the courthouse, talk to older people in your family, get your DNA done. If you do that, it comes back with all of the place that you were actually your ancestors came from. It does. And it gives you all of the different people that may be connected to you. That's a critical piece of your research. That's another jumpstart piece for you to do.
Wow.
And then tell your kids. Uh, then when they come home and they're dating, you want to know because I tell Jamal this. That could be a family member. Mhm. You got to know if that person's in your gene pool. All right.
Very
I
good.
hope that helped.
It does. Thank you. Well, anyone would like to, we have Facebook Live and we also have folks on Zoom. We'd like to ask Marlene any questions or comments or feedback. She's open at this point.
Okay.
All right, someone's thinking about that. I just want to ask you another one. If you were looking at a lot of the research, is it on microfiche and microfilm, whatever? Is it on the internet and in Washington D.C.? Where's most of the archives of stuff you have related to these events?
I would tell you to check your city. The Quakers and the Mormons, when I first came to Texas, I used microfiche and film. They have places with, yes,
You said Quakers,
yes.
Mormons?
Quakers loved slaves. They did.
Wow, I
And the
did not know that.
Mormons. Yes, they kept great records. They did. So, and the way I found a lot of the information I have on my tree is by looking for the archives. What places in my city had archive records? And I found that it was the Mormons, and there was a Quaker place here that had records on my family. So look for that in your city. Just Google it and see if there is a place that archive records from back in the day. And you'd be surprised at what. And then, like in Dallas, they have a black section in their library where they keep an extensive amount of black history records. So you may want to check with your local library to see if they have something like that you can use.
Mhm. I also know that the Catholic Church has extensive records of particularly what happened in Central and South America, and some of the priests, or some are very famous because they kept detailed records of their enslavement of indigenous people in North
Mm-hmm.
America as well as slaves. And so when you look at some of the books that have been put out lately by the priests or the ancestors of the priests, they really had a time on their hands since they
Mm-hmm.
weren't working hard, some of them, and they documented very well the enslavement. And again, the Catholic Church was very much involved in obviously
Yes.
oppression of slaves, and indigenous native people in North and Central and South America. So I know their
Mhm.
records have some good information also.
I look at it like this. If that's what it took for you to feed your family, and that was the norm, I just have to say that then that's what happened. That's what happened. And in the South, there was South cotton was king, and they needed to have a lot of resources. And in the Carolinas, it was sugarcane. They needed to have people to get out there and do that work.
Mhm,
So they went to get that so they could make money. Because at the core of all of what we're talking about is what I call the green. The green kept the brown down. It did, because that's our barter of choice is money. You will not be successful in America if you're not making a dollar.
wow.
Think
But
about it.
I did not ask you about Prosper, Texas, where you're at right now. A lot of is there like have you heard of any institution like higher education universities doing any of this stuff, or is this all like freelance or people do away from post-secondary education universities? So in other words, have you met any scholars or anybody who does this as part of their academic research, genealogy, any of that in higher education? Or are these more or less people out in the community?
No, I have not. But
Okay,
it could be I have not put myself in that sphere of influence either,
okay.
you know. But no, what I have done is just people that know me know what I do, and they have an ache to know about their tree. And then I've been able to use my resources and my talents and the things I know to help them out. Yes.
Mhm. But
Yeah.
what was that aha moment that started you on the first step? Do you remember how you really got involved? Your first search. What was the main thing that started you? What was the aha moment that you said, "I'm going to start looking at this area"? Do you remember a defining moment for yourself?
Okay. It's kind of a story.
Okay.
Okay. Um, I told you the story about my mom dying at 18. And my sister was 8 weeks. I was 18 months. And I went to live with the grandfather. I had this grandmother that I'd never seen that would always send me Christmas gifts and presents, but I never knew what she looked like. And I woke up one day and when I was an adult, I was like, well, no, let me fix this right. I finally met her. I finally met her. She came to visit me in Oklahoma. I was living there. And at some point in all of this relationship, where she got so sick she couldn't live by herself. So she came to live with me. And she began to tell me the stories about my mother and how smart she was and how much I was like her and how she liked to draw. And I just wanted to know more. So I went to Kansas City and I found out she didn't have a marker on her grave.
Mm.
I had to go out and find her. And I found her. I found her and I put a marker on her grave. So that's what kind of got me to thinking, I want to know more. I need to know more. I was a child that somebody finally wanted. And God keeps putting these people in my life to kind of bring me back to my roots. I need to explore that. So that was my impetus. That was one of, and I went to Kansas City, found her grave. I found cousins. I found a family that my dad had and left. Just yes,
Wow. It,
yes.
it, it reminds me of some other folks in Motor Life of Henry Lacks, how they had to go and find her grave and where she was buried at, who wrote who was involved in the Gila sale and so on. But again, back in those days, African Americans or people who were enslaved were buried in some strange places and sometimes without markers. And so centuries
Hmm.
later, it's hard to track it down. And so some people have gone back and able to find it, but some of the graveyards were not kept very well. And even
Oh
when
gosh, no.
problems here. So
Mm-mm.
that was a big issue also. If you don't have, again, if
Hmm.
you're poor, you may not have the money for a good headstone. And so again,
Right,
when you talk about
right.
generations later, it wears out or get lost or mud go over it and so on. So yes, it can be a challenge to figure out the linkage and so on. Uh,
Well, I tell you, you're the Byndon, my husband's dad. He was buried up in the hills in Madison, Arkansas. Just up, it was like the woods. I went back some years later and just they had it would you couldn't have found the headstone. It's just pitiful. It's awful.
Oh, you mean overgrowth and stuff like that?
Yes, yes, yes.
So
And
there's
then
no
of course there are
caretaker.
stories where they have wanted to build a road or a highway. Your grave was the black people's grave was in the way. They just go and mow it down.
Wow.
I just saw that story on TV, and I already knew that that happened. It happened in Oklahoma City. It did. It did. So yeah, we just but we keep giving.
I also know that they
And
had,
we're not going away.
well, that's true. I also know they had separate graveyards where you couldn't be buried
Oh
again, going back
gosh,
to the book,
yes.
and more, you couldn't have the black people and white people in the same cemetery. And when
You're
I
right.
visit places in Nebraska, they even have different religious groups where you had certain sects, they would might be Irish or different groups, and they wouldn't be with this group because of Scandinavian. So they had, and also I found out they had some of the graveyards are right next to the churches, which was news to
Yes.
me back in some
When
of the rural areas in Nebraska.
Yes, when I came to Texas, one of the things I wanted to do is then start tracing my paternal roots. So I found out where my great grandfather was born, where he raised, where he walked. I walked the fields where he walked. And I found his grave. They had him buried in the cemetery next to his son. But here's what the sign said. This is the black cemetery.
Oh, you actually
This
saw
is the
that.
white cemetery. They had a black side and they had a white side.
And this is in Texas.
This is in Texas.
Wow.
This is in right outside Austin.
Okay.
It is in Taylor, Texas.
Okay, Taylor, Texas. Gotcha.
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Well,
Yes, indeed.
the other thing that I think we need to talk about going back to this whole concept is that the importance of why we need to study this, but also read about it, but also hopefully help other people to see how important it is so that we can have a sense of belonging as a group or a people. Because sometimes people say, where do I come from? And again, it's not always positive, but it's something about that empty void or something that when people are adopted, they want to know who their biological parent is
Right,
sometimes. But also the same thing goes back to the Henry Gates show, Finding Your Roots, how people really wanted to find some interesting bits that they didn't know, and it helped them
right,
understand that. But also, there's some DNA issues. Like again, there are people who had to find relatives because, and I think you and I talked this off camera, was that they had some health issues. And so that was
right,
another reason they needed, because if they needed some kind of a transplant, they wanted someone to have a
right,
biological match. So there are all
right.
kinds of wonderful and powerful and medical reasons why people really want to know who they come from and so on.
And
Well,
that's
we
why
are,
I'm so in love with DNA because it does help you understand that. And then Ancestry has this, they do keep death records.
do
So,
what?
death records, you can find death certificates online
Oh,
and
okay.
Ancestry, and it has the cause of death. And one of the things I discovered quickly is that high blood pressure runs in my family. That's what my dad died from, and also what my grandfather died from. And so
Wow.
I have a proven history of why why I have that genetic marker. It's part of my if a part of my genes. I'm kind of bent toward that. And here's another thing that is so cool about our family. The way you know you belong to us is because we have an autoimmune disease.
Hmm.
And it causes us to have white spots. And my sister, my son, we know you belong to us because we asked you, where are your white freckles?
That's funny.
I have a daughter who does not have the white freckles, and so she swears she's adopted. She's a Bindon. She has more Bindon genes than she has Wade genes, but she wants the spots. She wants the spots so she can feel like she belongs.
There you go. There you go. Do we have any questions from any of our participants today? If anyone want to make comments, because we may wind down a little bit. Any other comments or anything?
Sure, Ms. Byndon, hi. Question for you. Have you found any success in obviously tracing roots and genealogy in looking at, for example, funeral programs or even just looking at old census records that are made public after, I believe it's 80 or 90 years when they're public? I mean, what's your take home thoughts on that, or if you had any success using those two methods?
I'm not sure that I got the first part of your question. Could you
Any success using, like, for example, a funeral program
oh,
where you kind of
funeral.
see that in sometimes we have those from generations back and
Yeah.
using that to see whose mom is related to who and things of that nature.
You are so right on. You are so right on. And can I tell you why? Because I'm working on someone's history right now. And the way I found linkage to him and a football star is through funeral obituaries.
Hmm.
They have those online. And back in the day, the black people was over on one side of the paper and the white folks was on the other, if you were in there at all. But the obituaries are is a great resource of saying, because you know they will always have it listed. Here's the mother, here's the father, here's the sisters, and a host of nieces and friends. So you can nephews and nieces. So you can use that data to kind of connect the dots. So that's an absolutely excellent question. And they have a site that does nothing but has nothing but obituaries that you can pay to go in and look at.
Wow, did not know that.
Mm-hmm. Yes, they do. Yes.
By the way, we didn't ever talk about this, but is there books out there? Because I've never seen a book on searching your roots. I know these you see things on the internet, or you see articles here and there, you see magazine adverts. But has somebody have written a definitive book or anything out there that people buy that was considered the expert on genealogy?
I don't have books that is the expert on genealogy. I have a variety of things. And I say it depends on where you are in your research. They have on Amazon building the family tree for dummies.
Oh, okay, on
I
Amazon. Okay.
just I just ordered just the basics of doing family research on Amazon. Just put in genealogy research, and they have all kind of books. So you probably want to buy at the level that you're at, right? I have 3 or 4 books that I used that have helped me. In fact, I got a book a couple of weeks ago. I haven't had a chance to open it, and I just want to see if I learned something new from it. They usually will give you resources or places where you can get a good start.
Mhm.
Yes,
By
but
the way,
yes,
this guy who did his DNA test, how do you do that? You have to swab your tongue, or how does I don't know. I heard seen on TV, but how do you do that initially? You put it inside a test tube or what?
yes, you do. You just swab your cheek and then you put it, no, let me see. Okay, I don't want to tell you the truth. They send you the tube, at least Ancestry does. You swab and then you stick it in the tube and there's some liquid in there. You
Okay.
screw it down and you would have ordered it off of Ancestry, so they will be looking for it. And they get it and then they will attach it to your DNA will come across to your tree once they go in and do the testing. And it takes about 4 to 6 weeks. Once you send it off, then they will attach your results to the tree that you have online.
So there's this one Latina I know. She was telling me she was able to trace. She has 4% African blood, so much European blood, so much Indian blood. Is that how this works? Is that what you're talking about?
Yes. They keep telling me when I first started on out on this, I was from Cameroon. And they didn't now I am 19% Nigerian.
Okay.
They could continue to update my traits. So it will take you back to the region on which your people started. It'll give you, and it will track you to how to America. So it will give you all of the different bloodlines, how the tribes, because we came together as people on those ships. And so we are once we got to this country. So they can trace you all the way back to your African country roots.
One thing I
And
did.
I'm going to invite you to the tree so you can see that in the DNA summary will be there.
Okay.
Yes,
You say invite
very
me to the
interesting.
tree. When you say invite me to the tree, what do you mean the tree?
I am going to invite you to my to the binding. I have a
Okay, got
binding.
you. Okay,
I have
got
a
you.
binding button tree,
Okay,
and
got
I
you.
also have a Wade. I my last name, maiden name is Wade,
I mean
and then I
paternal.
have a Wade McCain tree, which
O-
is the maternal and paternal side of the family.
Okay, got you. So
Yeah.
both sides in. Okay, good.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, we are. I don't know if we have any other questions, but we want to give you an opportunity if there's no other questions, and maybe give us any closing comments or anything. But any other questions before we close out? So, Marlene, any question, any comments you want to make before we close out? And also, if somebody want to contact you, how would they do it? Through your Facebook? Do you have an email out there? Or do you let people contact you if they want to learn more about what you're doing?
Of course. I don't know how we would do that here unless you want to put it in the chat. But you have my email is marlene.byndon@yahoo.com.
Okay, your name, basically. Okay, good.
My name. And then of course you can text me at 816-456-6803.
Good. Thank you.
Those are two ways that you can get in touch with me. And I take great joy in helping you discover who from whence you came. That's the way my grandfather would have said it. Don't you want to know, girl, from whence you came? Well, yeah. Uh-huh. Girl, let me tell you about my mama. Yeah. That's my grandfather was the first generation in his family that was not a slave.
Wow.
He was born in 1889, 1890, just depending on who you talk to. And he didn't know how to read nor write, but he knew how to work. And I want to leave this comment. He would say to me all the time that hard work never hurt nobody. It may make you tired. It may make you tired, girl, but it ain't gonna hurt you.
There you go.
Go to work. Go to work. And that's what has helped me through my career and allowing me to do some of the things I've done. It's understanding from whence I came and appreciating the journey that my folks took to get me to where I am. And here's what I want to leave people with. That's why it's so important to tell your kids. You tell them the story. You put them on your shoulders so they know that the people that came before them made it possible for them to do what they're doing today.
Well,
They made it possible. Yeah. Yeah.
appreciate that. Appreciate that. Well,
Mhm.
Marlene Byndon, appreciate you being able to share more about this topic. This is kind of a first for us to do that, and again, very informative. And as we said, this will be put on our web page as well as on our Facebook page, and hopefully give people the inspiration to do more, learning about their ancestors. We say, finding your roots and learning about those people's shoulders who we stand on. So we
Right.
really appreciate you.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for allowing me to share my story and to share what little I know about finding roots.
Good. Thank
All
you.
right. Uh-huh.
We've hoped you've
Okay.
enjoyed this edition of Throwing Out Some Heavy Light. We'll have another edition coming up probably in the following week. And again, in coming weeks, we're going to have different stories and different interviews and so on. And also, we hope to have other partners join us where they can host and talk about other topics that pertain to people of color, and particularly African Americans. And of course, obviously, dealing with some of the racism, anti-racism issues in our society, because it's very important, even more so today, looking at what's happening on the national and the local scene. So we hope you enjoyed this edition of Throwing Out Some Heavy Light. And we always end by saying, may the force be with you. Baroko.
Okay.